I am Takano, QA engineer, and I will speak about launching the QA automation team and the current state of test automation. So I will first briefly introduce myself. When I was a new graduate, I was in charge of QA for financial systems. After that, I changed jobs once to the gaming industry and experienced development by tinkering with Unity and Cocos 2D for client development and Perl and Ruby for backend development, and joined Merpay in December 2019 as a QA engineer again. I have strong interest around automation among QA work. My hobby is app development, and I'm currently creating an English learning app for people who are not good at English, as I myself is not very good at English myself. Today, I would like to talk about the area around test automation. So I will talk about the challenges faced by the QA team, how the automation team was set up, and what actions were taken. I think many of you may be particularly interested in the current state of test automation at Merpay, so I'd like to give a more in-depth explanation on that part. So let me start by explaining the challenges. There are a lot of new functions, services, or modifications to be released company-wide, and every team wants to release as soon as possible. Under such circumstances, the Merpay QA organization is slightly short of QA engineers. As a matter of fact, one QA engineer is working on several projects at the same time, and certain projects are being carried out by partner companies, so the Merpay QA team alone has more than it can handle. Therefore, we would like to release the product quality by automating some of the tests while alleviating the shortage of staff as much as possible. However, there is also the problem of not having enough time to even automate the tests. Next, I would like to talk about the establishment of the automation team. While the QA team had some automation challenges, the team I was responsible for was relatively well automated with a lot of help from the development engineers. So here are some past articles, so please read them if you like. These articles are about automated API testing and automated job testing. By automating like this, the release speed of the microservices I was in charge of was stable. Also, as my personal motivation was around automation, I wanted to establish a QA team that can work across teams. So I discussed my aspiration with my manager at the time, and he readily agreed. So I started thinking about how to specifically create an automation team and how to move forward. Before taking concrete action, I first envisioned the ideal situation. As far as existing projects were concerned, regression testing is just running automated tests. For new and renewal projects, I thought that the ideal state would be a state where the test automation strategy is decided at the test planning stage and where automated tests can be executed before the release. To reach such states, the automation team's mission was to firstly to set up an automation infrastructure, and secondly to bring each QA team to a state where they can write and maintain automated tests. But then a problem arose. When the time came to go ahead with automation, there was a lot we didn't know, such as which teams were able to automate and how much testing and how many services there were to support in the first place. Moreover, when we asked these questions within the QA team, none of the QA members had an overall grasp of the situation. This meant that we couldn't even plan which services to support by when and to what extent. So we decided to first try to understand the situation. Thus, our first move was to first understand the current situation, then select the teams to support, and then support automated testing. Next, I would like to present some concrete actions. First is how we organized the current situation and what the results were. As a point of reference for the interviews to understand the current situation, we first tried to identify all the target microservices, as we had no idea about the target microservices in the first place. In addition, we organized the test target units by category: backend, front-end, and application. We also interviewed the teams about the current automation status, the tools they use for testing, and whether they would like to automate in the future. Please bear in mind that these survey results are from last year and are a little out of date. Here is some additional information on the test subjects. There is a reason why we categorize them as backend, front-end, and application. This is because the backend is almost equal to the microservices, and many teams at Merpay perform quality assurance on a microservice basis. The reason for this is to find defects that should be found before merging with the front end and app, as well as to find defects that should be found when merging microservices. If quality assurance can be done for each microservice, it is also possible to release microservice on a per microservices basis. For this reason, the scope of quality assurance is categorized as backend, front-end, and application. This concept is similar to the commonly known test pyramid. If you are familiar with the test pyramid, it is as if quality assurance is partially implemented at the stage before UI testing. Returning to the current situation, here is the result of identifying the number of services to be covered. The unit of measure is the QA team, which may not be intuitive, but the backend is equal to the number of microservices, and the front end is the number of web-based services related to merchants, etc., and for apps, the number of microservices used from the apps. In Merpay, there are overwhelmingly more microservices, and a higher proportion of QA is also targeted at the backend. This is the result of the automation status. For the backend, 35.4% of the services are being tested manually. 30.8% have completed automation to the extent possible, 26.2% do not require automation, and 7.7% are partially automated but still have areas that can be automated. For the front end, 72.7% of services have automation, 18.2% have manual, and 9.1% have no need for automation. For apps, 42.9% were done manually, 42.9% did not require automation, and 14.3% partially automated. As a trend that emerged from these results, the proportion of services that have already been automated was highest in front-end services, followed by back-ends and then apps. So as supplementary information, the reasons for not requiring automation include the scale is small and there is little benefit in automation, in-house services where QA is not involved in the first place, services that are no longer in operations or services that have completed their role, and services that cannot be checked without using actual equipment such as NFC. Next is about the tools which were used, and the results are as followed. For the backend, Postman accounted for the majority, 51.2%, followed by an in-house Synagogue, an in-house tool provided by Merpay Architects team, 39%, and the rest were in-house tools implemented by microservices, 9.8%. As for the front end, the situation was almost exclusively Cypress, which accounted for 90% of the total, with some in-house tools being used. For apps, the usage rates of each OS was 100%, but XCUI was used for iOS and Espresso was used for Android. To break down the back end a little more, the back end can be broadly divided into two categories, API testing and job testing, so we also graphed the results by API and job. In terms of automation status, 34.4% of APIs are done manually, 29.5% are automated, 27.9% of services do not require automation, and 8.2% are partially automated. The trend for jobs was split between 50% manual, 25% automated, and 25% partially automated. Given that a higher proportion of job tests were executed manually than API tests, there was a trend that testing jobs seems to be more difficult to automate. Looking at the tools used, Postman was used for 61.8% of APIs and Synario for 38.2%, while original in-house tools for each microservice accounted for 66.7% of jobs and Synario for 33.3%, with Postman for APIs and in-house tools for jobs accounting for the majority. The trend was also divided here, with Synario being used for some of the jobs. Many of the back-end in-house tools were used to execute jobs and one-offs. Therefore, many teams basically check the results by visually checking the DB tables. Therefore, it is rare to find a case where the testing of job can be automated using in-house tools. However, there are cases where job execution and even checking of expected values were carried out, which we have introduced in past articles. If you are interested, please read through these articles. As an interesting trend, when we surveyed the tools used only for services that perform manual backend testing, we found that Postman was used by 92.9% and in-house tools by 7.1%, with Postman having by far the highest rate of use.
I believe that this is due to the fact that the postmen are more readily available and therefore more likely to be employed when responding with a sense of urgency. Also, the scenario is not used in manual testing because they are tools to execute test scenarios and are used to on the premise that they can be automated. So here's a summary of test automation trend. First, let's talk about the backend. In API testing, in the most cases, Postman or scenario is used. Also, Postman is used for manual execution of API tests in most cases. As for job testing, in-house tools for each microservices or scenario was used. Also, I found that the development engineers also perform integration testing. But for that testing, they use the E2E testing framework, which is made in Go language. From the API test and onward, the QA team is doing the test. They are using the different tools. You can read more about the E2E test framework used by the development engineers in this article. So if you are interested, please refer to it. Next, I would like to talk about front-end trend. The front end is basically using Cypress. This is because it is easy to set up and easy to write test codes and well documented. And it is an OSS that is used by many people. And for various other reasons, it meets the requirement of what we want to do with Merpay better than other testing tools. For the parts that are difficult to automate in Cypress, we do manual testing. Another thing that is a little bit different from the backend is that the front-end side uses Cypress, which is also used in the QA phase during the integration testing phase. You can read more about the front-end team's test automation policy in this article. So if you're interested, please check it out. Next, let's talk about trends in apps. On the app side, the tools are also very clear. iOS is using XCUI and Android is using Espresso. The reason is because on the Mercari side, there is a trend that the development engineers write tests, and the development engineers themselves select tools that are easy to use, and the Merpay follows the suite. There was a time when QA automated the process using Appium, but there was a problem that the management cost was too high, so we heard that they changed the way. Lastly, I'd like to talk about the overall trend. And for the front-end team is running the foremost front in automation. I think that automation trends to increase if the similar environments are used to write test codes by both development and QA engineers. Here the list. So for front-end, both development and the QA engineer use Cypress. Back-end, development engineers use Go language, and the QA engineer use Postmanual Scenario. For apps, only development engineer use XCUI or Espresso. Based on the trend of automation, so far we decided to define an automation policy as an automation team, considering how to make automation more valuable. We basically focus on one tool as the selection criteria. We want development engineers to write test codes, so we wanted to select the tool which is easy to use for development engineers. We aim to make it possible for any development and the QA engineer to write the test code, so to make the test code simple with emphasis on maintainability and the readability. The simple means different for everything, but I have an idea that one element of simplicity is describes the test codes based on the behavior. This is an article by Suemura-san of Otified, and he said that what is required for the E2E test is that the behavior remains the same, and this spec change of behavior should be detected in E2E testing, and therefore behavior is justice. So I agree with this, and I think that the unit of a behavior is easy to understand by people, which naturally improves readability. To give you a concrete example on the back end, for each meaningful behavior, such as creating a user or making a smart payment to buy a product, or executing a monthly job to make it ready for a clearing, or check if the clearing has been completed successfully or not, you write a simple step test code. By doing so, test code becomes very easy to understand. As a front-end example, please think of a typical web services like entering an address, entering a password, pressing a login button, making sure that the user is transferred to the top screen of the service, and so on, each of which is a single operation. So let me go back to the automation policy, and next is a specific policy regarding the tools to be used. As for the backend, we can write the scenario with YAML, and because we can use Go or language to describe, and also there is a functionality to organize parts of the scenario by behavior units. We have a policy to use a scenario basically. And the scenario execute batches in different ways, but the execution itself can be done. So we made policy to unify the tools across the backend. However, if it's possible to reduce the overall cost by extending the in-house tool, then the internal tool should be used. Front-end apps basically follow the status quo. After understanding the trend of automation and having established the policy, we next consider the handling policy. We found that the backend team seemed to be the most willing to automate, so we decided to focus our support on the backend teams for now. We also decided to prioritize support for services that have not yet been automated or the ones that have regression tests regularly but not automated yet. We also decided to hold a priority study session to deepen understanding of how to use the tools, as there was a demand from the teams to know how to use the tools, and also they had to be used in operation. As a result, the direction of the automation team was changed. The red portion were changed, updated. So added specific actions of creating infrastructure and conducting study sessions. Next, I will briefly introduce what we did to create automation infra. Basically, we made a policy of using scenario, so we took care of setting up the scenario. Also, if the use of in-house tools were involved in test operation, we listened to the users and implemented process with plugin of scenario and adjusted them for automation. Next, I'd like to briefly introduce the creation of an automated test. We created an automated test according to a policy. So it was very simple. We also shared what we created in the study session and encouraged the entire QA team to deepen their understanding of the tool. We also give advice on how to implement it on a consultation basis. However, even though we were an automation team, we are a one-person team. So I felt that I was limited in the amount of work I could do. So I decided to focus on a higher priority project to support. I focused on the support on the automation as a product team, and so leaving the development engineer to do what they can do. These are the actions done. Now I'd like to introduce a result of the team and the challenges for the future. As a result, we were able to visualize the status of test automation. We were able to set up a foundation for automation and provide the environment for the automation. As a result, several teams were able to take the first step towards automation. Also, by establishing an automation policy, we are able to give direction as to what we should do with automation. Our issue is that adding and maintaining the cases still seem to be difficult, but I think we need to continue to address this issue with patience. Also, I like to have QA engineers' involvement at some point in the future, as the automation of the apps has not been started yet. Also, although not a direct result, the automation policy was established this time and has been leveraged in other new projects. So I think we are heading in the right direction. To summarize what we did, we created a team to promote test automation. As activities, we organize the current status. We find out the current status of the test automation, supported building automation infrastructure, and supported writing test codes and held study sessions on support tools. By assessing the current situation, we found that it would be great if the backend automation would progress. So we focused on the automation mainly for the backend team. Also, as for the tools used, the backend team, backend use the Scenario, Postman in-house tools, and the front-end teams use Cypress, apps use XUI and Espresso. We also established an automation policy. We decided to use one tool instead of many, and we use Scenario for the backend and the Cypress for front-end and XUI and Espresso for apps. And we also decided that the test code should be written based on Scenario so that anyone can understand. And lastly, I felt the importance of all teams members acting with quality in mind when promoting an automation. In other words, I felt the limit of what I could do by myself. So we are always looking for more people who are boosting test automation. If you are interested in the test automation, please let us know. That concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.